The day I came home from the hospital, 3 days after major surgery, holding my newborn son, my husband opened the front door exactly 4 inches. Just 4 inches. Not enough to let me in, but enough to say, "My mother lives here now. You need to leave." I stood in that hallway, stitches still raw, arms shaking, baby asleep on my chest, and I made a choice. Not the choice he expected. Not tears. Not begging. I opened my bag. And what I pulled out of that bag didn't just end my marriage. It ended everything he thought he'd built. Stay with me, because this story doesn't go where you think it's going. My name is Claire. I'm 33 years old. I'm a licensed forensic accountant, which, if you don't know what that means, think of it this way. I find things people try to hide in numbers. I find the truth inside spreadsheets that other people assume no one will ever read carefully enough. That detail matters. Remember it. I grew up in a mid-sized city in Ohio, the kind of place where your neighbors still wave at you from their driveways and people actually show up when things get hard. I was raised by a mother who worked double shifts and a father who told me every single morning, "Claire, a woman who understands her own paperwork will never be powerless." I didn't fully understand what he meant until I was standing in a hallway holding my 3-day-old baby, locked out of my own home. I met my husband, I'll call him Carter, at a work conference 6 years ago. He was charming in that specific way that's hard to explain until you've experienced it yourself. Not loud. Not showy. He had this quiet confidence, this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. He remembered small details. He asked follow-up questions. He listened. Or at least, he performed listening so well that for years, I couldn't tell the difference. We dated for 2 years. We got married in a small ceremony, just family and close friends, and we moved into a beautiful apartment together in a newer part of the city. His mother, Patricia, came with the package. And I want to be careful how I describe her, because I've spent a lot of time processing this and I don't want to be unfair. Patricia is a woman who loves her son. Deeply. Completely. The problem is, she loves him the way some people love a possession. She was widowed when Carter was 16, and from what Carter told me, she rebuilt her entire identity around being his mother. His protector. His compass. When Carter and I started dating seriously, Patricia was polite. Courteous even. But there was always this undercurrent, this quiet test she was running on me every time we were in the same room. Could I cook the way she liked? Did I arrange the table correctly? Was I grateful enough, humble enough, small enough? I tried to build something real with her. I genuinely did. I brought her flowers. I called her on holidays without being prompted. I asked about her health, her history, her opinions, because I believed that a good marriage meant respecting the family that came with it. But Patricia didn't want a relationship with me. She wanted a hierarchy. And in her version of it, I was somewhere near the bottom. Still, I told myself it was manageable. Carter and I were solid. We communicated. We were building something. And then I got pregnant. I need you to understand something about what pregnancy does to a woman who is also a professional, also a caretaker, also a person trying to hold multiple worlds together simultaneously. It doesn't slow you down all at once. It changes you in slow degrees, a little more tired, a little more vulnerable, a little more dependent on the people around you to show up in the ways they promised. When I found out I was expecting, Carter's reaction was measured. Not cold, but measured. He said the right words. He hugged me. He told his mother. Patricia's response? She sent a text. Not a call. A text. "Congratulations. Hope you're taking care of yourself." That was it. I told myself she was just private. Reserved. That this was how she expressed things. But over the following months, something quietly shifted between Carter and me, and I couldn't name it at first. He started keeping his phone face down on the table. Not always, just often enough that I noticed. He started stepping outside to take certain calls, even when he was home on a weekend. There was a new distance in his eyes when I talked about the nursery, about names, about what our life was going to look like with a baby in it. I asked him once, directly, if everything was okay between us. He looked at me with this perfectly calm expression and said, "You're overthinking. It's the hormones." And I want to be honest with you, I half believed him. Because when you're exhausted and uncomfortable and growing a human being and you love someone, you want to believe them. You want the simple explanation. So I let it go. I focused on my work, my health, my preparation. I organized everything, documented everything. Hospital plans, insurance paperwork, financial disclosures, account information. I kept files the way my father taught me to keep files, neatly, completely, and always with copies. It was just habit. Or so I thought. Carter visited me in the hospital twice during my 4-day stay after the procedure. Twice. Both times brief. Both times he seemed distracted, checking his phone, glancing toward the door like he had somewhere more important to be. Patricia didn't come at all. Her excuse relayed through Carter. She wasn't feeling well. Hospitals make her anxious. I lay in that hospital bed feeding my newborn son, this tiny, perfect, completely innocent human being, and I told myself, it's fine. People show love differently. When I get home, things will settle. I was wrong. The morning I was discharged, the nurse walked me to the exit with a wheelchair, standard procedure after the kind of surgery I'd had. I had my bag over one shoulder, my son strapped carefully against my chest, and I was running on about 90 minutes of sleep and sheer determination. Carter didn't come to pick me up. He sent a car service. I told myself he was probably just tied up, that he'd be home, that I'd walk in and he'd take the baby and tell me to rest and everything would be okay. The car pulled up to our building. I took the elevator up. I stood in front of our door. I entered the code I'd used hundreds of times. The keypad flashed red. I tried again. Red. I stood there for a moment, confused, assuming maybe I'd mistyped. Post-surgery brain fog. Sleep deprivation. Simple mistake. I knocked. The door opened. 4 inches. Carter stood in the gap and his face, I'll remember this for the rest of my life, his face was not surprised to see me. He wasn't startled. He wasn't rushing to help me. He looked like a man who had prepared for this moment. You can't come in right now, he said. I genuinely thought I'd misheard him. What? My mother needs rest. She needs quiet. The baby, it's going to be a lot. You should stay with your parents for a while. I stared at him. Carter, I just had surgery 3 days ago. This is my home. He didn't flinch. Just for a while. A few months. Maybe closer to a year. Until things settle down. And then Patricia appeared behind him. She was dressed like she was going somewhere nice. Hair done. Jewelry on. She looked at me, looked at my newborn son, and said, "We just had the floors cleaned. Please don't bring all of that in here. All of that." She meant my child. Her grandson. All of that. I have replayed that moment so many times. And every time, I come back to the same feeling I had in that hallway. Not just heartbreak, not just fury, but a sudden, crystalline stillness. Like something in me that had been trying very hard to stay warm finally stopped pretending. I looked at my husband. I looked at his mother. And I understood that I had 2 choices. I could fall apart. Or I could be exactly who my father raised me to be. I didn't raise my voice. That's the part people find hardest to believe when I tell this story. They expect that I screamed, or cried, or demanded to be let in. And honestly, those would all have been understandable responses. But I've spent my career learning that the loudest person in the room is almost never the most powerful one. So I took one breath. I shifted my son gently on my chest, and I made 2 phone calls. The first was to building management, asking them to send a representative to document that I, a co-leaseholder of the apartment, was being physically prevented from entering my own home. The second was to the non-emergency line, to ask for an officer to come and help mediate a civil matter. Carter heard me making these calls. His posture changed. The door opened a little wider, not to welcome me in, but because he suddenly needed to see what I was doing, needed to assess the situation he'd assumed was completely under his control. "What are you doing?" he said. "Don't make this into something it isn't." "I'm not making it into anything," I said, very calmly. "I'm documenting it." The elevator opened. A building representative came out first. Then, a few minutes later, an officer arrived. Neighbors had started appearing in their doorways, quietly, the way neighbors do when something feels off but they don't want to intrude. "Patricia, who had been standing behind Carter performing quiet dignity, suddenly shifted her performance entirely. She pressed one hand to her chest. Her voice went soft and trembling. "Look at what she's doing to me," she said. "I'm not well. I can't handle this kind of conflict." The officer looked at her. Then he looked at me, standing there with a newborn, a surgical recovery belt visible under my coat, a diaper bag on my shoulder. He asked, very professionally, if I could confirm my connection to the residents. I said yes. And then I reached into my bag. Here's the thing about being a forensic accountant who also happens to be very organized and very thorough. You don't keep a folder like this on purpose, necessarily. You keep it because keeping files is just what you do. It's reflex. It's training. But sometimes, what you've collected out of pure habit turns out to be exactly what you need. Inside that folder was a copy of the lease, both our names, my signature dated first, a copy of our marriage certificate, bank statements showing that for the past 4 years, my income had been the primary source of the mortgage payments, organized neatly, month by month. And then there were the other documents, the ones I hadn't fully processed yet emotionally. Because when you're trained to look at financial records, sometimes you see things you weren't looking for. Over the past several months, I had noticed irregularities. Small transfers. Recurring payments to accounts I didn't recognize. A pattern that, if you knew what you were looking at, told a very specific story about where money had been going and why. I hadn't confronted Carter about them directly. Part of me had been waiting for the right time, waiting to be sure, waiting because I was pregnant and exhausted and I kept hoping I was wrong. I was not wrong. Carter saw that folder. He saw exactly which folder it was, because he recognized the color of it, the tab on the side, the way I'd labeled it in my handwriting. And his face. This is the moment I will remember for the rest of my life. His face did something I had never seen it do before. It went completely still. Not angry. Not defensive. Afraid. The officer asked me to walk him through the situation calmly, and I did. I explained that I was a co-leaseholder returning to my home after a medical procedure. I explained that the access code had been changed without my knowledge or consent. I explained that I had documentation of my residency, my financial contributions, and several other matters that I intended to present to my attorney. My attorney. I hadn't called her yet. But I said it the way I'd say anything I knew was already true. Because it was. Carter tried to speak twice. Both times, the officer held up one hand, professionally and firmly, and said, "Sir, I'll get to you." Patricia had gone very quiet. The building representative confirmed on record that I was listed as a co-leaseholder and that no legal proceeding had been filed that would justify restricting my access. Within 40 minutes, I walked into my own home. Carter stepped back to let me through. He didn't say a word. I want to be honest with you about what came next, because this isn't a movie and I'm not going to pretend it was clean or easy. What came next was hard. I contacted my attorney that same afternoon. I sat on the floor of the nursery, my son finally asleep in the bassinet I had assembled myself 6 weeks earlier, and I laid out everything. The documents, the financial records, the pattern I had found, the events of that morning. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "Claire, you have everything you need." The legal process took time. It was emotionally exhausting in ways I didn't fully anticipate, even though I'd spent years working adjacent to situations like this for other people. There's a difference between understanding something professionally and living it personally. The grief is real. The anger is real. The moments at 2 a.m. when your baby is crying and you're alone and you wonder how you got here, those are real too. But here is also what is real. Carter had been moving money, consistently and carefully, into accounts I wasn't supposed to know about. He had not been planning for our family's future. He had been planning for a different future, one that did not include me. The financial disclosure process in our case was, for Carter, a particularly uncomfortable experience. Because when the other side's forensic review team saw what I had already compiled, the documentation, the timeline, the pattern, they didn't have much room to maneuver. There's a specific kind of silence that happens in a legal proceeding when someone realizes that the person they underestimated has been more prepared than them all along. I've seen it professionally. I got to see it personally. The settlement was fair. More than fair, given what was documented. Patricia, for her part, Lost something she hadn't anticipated losing either, the carefully maintained image of a devoted grandmother. When the timeline of events became part of the formal record, including her statement about all of that in reference to her newborn grandson, certain family members and social connections began to quietly reassess their understanding of her character. She didn't have to answer to a court for what she said in that hallway. But people who loved that little boy heard about it. And they remembered. My son is almost 18 months old. He has this laugh, this completely unself-conscious, full-body laugh, that makes every single hard thing worth it. He's curious and stubborn, and he already has opinions about which books we read at bedtime, and I love him so completely that sometimes I just sit and watch him sleep because I can't believe he's a real. I went back to work part-time when he was 6 months old. Full-time by 10 months. I have my own apartment now, just ours. I painted the living room a color I chose. I arranged the furniture the way I wanted. There's no one in it who makes me feel like a guest. My father calls every Sunday. He never says, "I told you so." But sometimes when I tell him how things are going, he just gets quiet for a moment and then says, "That's my girl. That's enough." I've thought a lot about what I would say to a woman who is standing exactly where I was standing that morning. Not the specifics. Every situation is different. Every story has its own texture. But if I could say one thing, it would be this. The moment someone tries to make you feel like a stranger in your own life, that is the moment to stop being polite and start being precise. Polite lets people rewrite the story. Precise doesn't. Know your paperwork. Know your rights. Know that staying calm is not the same as staying silent, and that the most powerful thing you can sometimes do is simply say, clearly and without drama, "I'm going to document this." Those 4 words change rooms. They changed mine. Before I go, I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want to know your answer. Have you ever been in a situation where staying calm, when every part of you wanted to fall apart, ended up being the most powerful thing you did? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. I'm Velyra Payback, and I'll see you in the next one.